Part 1. Flower of the Quince. Chapter 1. The Cardinal of Valencia. For 3 days I had been cooling my heels about the Vatican, vexed by suspense. It fretted me that I should have been so lightly dealt with after I had discharged a mission that had brought me all the way from Pesaro, and I wondered how long it might be ere His Most Illustrious Excellency the Cardinal of Valencia might see fit to offer me the honorable employment with which Madonna Lucrezia had promised me that he would reward the service I had rendered the house of Borgia by my journey. 3 days were sped, yet naught had happened to signify that things would shape the course by me so ardently desired, that the means would be afforded me of mending my miserable ways, and repairing the wreck my life had suffered on the shoals of fate. True, I had been housed and fed, and the comfort of indolence had been mine. But, for the rest, I was still clothed in the livery of folly which I had worn on my arrival, and wherever I might roam, there followed ever at my heels a crowd of underlings, seeking to have their tedium lightened by jests and capers, and voting me, when their hopes proved barren, the sorriest fool that had ever worn the motley. On that 3rd day I speak of, my patience tried to its last strand. I had beaten a lackey with my hands, and fled from the cursed jibes as fellows aimed at me, out into the misty gardens and the chill January air, whose sting I could, perhaps, the better disregard by virtue of the heat of indignation that consumed me. Was it ever to be so with me? Could nothing lift the curse of folly from me, that I must ever be a fool, and worse, the sport of other fools? It was there on one of the terraces crowning the splendid heights above immortal Rome that Messer Gianluca found me. He greeted me courteously. I answered with a snarl, deeming him come to pursue the plaguing from which I had fled. His Most Illustrious Excellency the Cardinal of Valencia is asking for you, Messer Boccadoro, he announced. And so despairing had been my mood of ever hearing such a summons that, for a moment, I had counted it some fresh jest of theirs. But the gravity of his fat countenance reassured me. Let us go, then, I answered with alacrity, and so confident was I that the interview to which he bade me was the first step along the road to better fortune, that I permitted myself a momentary return to the fool's estate from which I thought myself on the point of being forever freed. I shall use the interview to induce His Excellency to submit a 10th beatitude to the approval of our Holy Father. Blessed are the bearers of good tidings. Come on, Messer the Seneschal. I led the way, in my impatience forgetful of his great paunch and little legs, so that he was sorely tried to keep pace with me. Yet who would not have been in haste, urged by such a spur as had I? Here, then, was the end of my shameful travesty. Tomorrow a soldier's harness should replace the motley of a jester. The name by which I should be known again to men would be that of Lazzaro Biancamont, and no longer Boccadoro, the fool of the golden mouth. Thus much had Madonna Lucrezia's promises led me to expect, and it was with a soul full of joyous expectation that I entered the great man's closet. He received me in a manner calculated to set me at my ease, and yet there was about him a something that overawed me. Cesare Borgia, Cardinal of Valencia, was then in his 23rd year, for all that there hung about him the semblance of a greater age, just as his cardinalitial robes lent him the appearance a height far above the middle stature that was his own. His face was pale and framed in a silky auburn beard. His nose was aquiline and strong, his eyes the keenest that I have ever seen, his forehead lofty and intelligent. He seemed pervaded by an air of feverish restlessness, something surpassing the vivid of Vicinimi, something that marked him to discerning eyes for a man of incessant action of body and of mind. My sister tells me, he said in greeting, that you are willing to take service under me, Messer Biancamont. Such was the hope that guided me to Rome, most excellent. I answered him. Surprise flashed into his eyes, and was gone as quickly as it had come. His thin lips parted in a smile, whose meaning was inscrutable. As some reward for the safe delivery of the letter you brought me from her, he questioned mildly. Precisely, illustrious, I answered in all frankness. His open hand smote the table of wood mosaics at which he sat. Praise be heaven, he cried. You seem to promise that I shall have in you a follower who deals in truth. Could your Excellency, to whom my real name is known, expect aught else of one who bears it, however unworthily? There was amusement in his glance. Can you still swagger it? After having worn that livery for 3 years, he asked, and his lean forefinger pointed at my hideous motley of red and black and yellow. I flushed and hung my head, and, as if to mock that very expression of my shame, the bells on my cap gave forth a silvery tinkle at the movement. Excellency, spare me, I murmured, Did you know all my miserable story you would be merciful? Did you know with what joy I turned my back on the court of Pesaro? I, he broke in mockingly, when Giovanni Sforza threatened to have you hanged for the overboldness of your tongue. Not until then did it occur to you to turn from the shameful life in which the best years of your manhood were being wasted. There, just now I commended your truthfulness. But the truth that dwells in you is no more, it seems, than the truth we may look for in the mouth of folly. At heart, I fear you are a hypocrite, Messer Biancamont, the worst form of hypocrite, a hypocrite to your own self. Did your excellency know all? I cried. I know enough, he answered, with stern sorrow. Enough to make me marvel that the son of Ettore Biancamont of Biancamont should play the fool to Costanzo Sforza, lord of Pesaro. Oh, you will tell me that you went there for revenge, to seek to right the wrong his father did your father. It was, I cried, with heated vehemence. Be flames everlasting the dwelling of my soul, if any other motive drove me to this shameful trade. There was a pause. His beautiful eyes flamed with sudden light as they rested on me. Then the lids drooped demurely, and he drew a deep breath. But when he spoke, there was scorn in his voice. And no doubt, it was that same motive kept you there, at peace for 3 whole years, in slothful ease, the motleyed fool, jesting and capering for his enemy's delectation. You, a man with a nightly memory of your foully wronged parent, cry hourly shame upon you. No doubt you lacked the opportunity to bring the tyrant to account. Or was it that you were content to let him make a mock of you so long as he housed and fed you and clothed you in your garish livery of shame? Spare me, excellency, I cried again. Of your charity let my past be done with. When he drove me forth with threats of hanging, from which your gracious sister saved me, I turned my steps to Rome at her bidding to find honorable employment at my hands. He interrupted quietly, then suddenly rising and speaking in a voice of thunder. And what, then, of your revenge? He cried. It has been frustrated, I answered lamely. Sufficient do I account the ruin that already I have wrought in my life by the pursuit of that phantom. I was trained to arms, my lord. Let me discard for good these tawdry rags, and strap a soldier's harness to my back. How came you to journey hither thus? He asked, suddenly turning the subject. It was Madonna Lucrezia's wish. She held that my errand would be safer so, for a fool may travel unmolested. He nodded that he understood, and paced the chamber with bowed head. For a spell there was silence, broken only by the soft fall of his slippered feet and the swish of his silken purple. At last he paused before me and looked up into my face, for I was a good head taller than he was. His fingers combed his auburn beard, and his beautiful eyes were full on mine. That was a wise precaution of my sister's, he approved. I will take a lesson from her in the matter. I have employment for you, Messer Biancamont. I bowed my head in token of my gratitude. You shall find me diligent and faithful, my lord. I promise him. I know it, he sniffed. Else should I not employ you. He turned from me and stepped back to his table. He took up a package, fingered a moment, then dropped it again and shot me one of his quiet glances. That is my answer to Madonna Lucrezia's letter, he said slowly, his voice as smooth as silk. And I desire that you shall carry it to Pesaro for me and deliver it safely and secretly into her hands. I could do no more than stare at him. It seemed as if my mind were stricken numb. Well, he asked at last, and in his voice there was now a suggestion of steel beneath the silk. Do you hesitate? And if I do, I answered, suddenly finding my voice, I do no more than might a bolder man. How can I, who am banned by punishment of death, contrive to penetrate again into the court of Pesaro and reach the Lady Lucrezia? That is a matter that I shall leave to the shrewd wit which all Italy says is the heritage of Boccadoro, the prince of fools. Does the task daunt you? His glance and voice were alike harsh. In very truth it did, and I told him so, but in the terms which the shrewd wit he said was mine dictated. I hesitate, my lord, indeed, but more because I fear the frustration of your own ends, whatever they may be, than because I dread to earn a broken neck by again adventuring into Pesaro. Would not some other messenger, unknown at the court of Giovanni Sforza, be in better case to acquit himself of such a task? Yes, if I had one I could trust, he answered frankly. I will be open with you, Biancamont. There are such grave matters at issue, there are such secrets confided to that paper, that I would not for a kingdom, not for our Holy Father's triple crown, that they should fall into alien hands. He approached me again, and his slender hand, upon which the sacred amethyst was glowing, fell lightly on my shoulder. He lowered his voice. You are the man, the one man in Italy, whose interests are bound up with mine in this. Therefore are you the one man to whom I can entrust that package. I gasped in amazement, as well I might. For what interest had Boccadoro, the fool, in common with Cesare Borgia, Cardinal of Valencia? You, he answered vehemently. You, Lazzaro Biancamont of Biancamont, whose father Costanzo of Pesaro stripped of his domains. The matters in those papers mean the ruin of the Lord of Pesaro. We are all but ripe to strike at him from Rome, and when we strike, he shall be so disfigured by the blow that all Italy shall hold its sides to laugh at the sorry figure he will cut. I would not say so much to any other living man, but you, and if I tell it you, it is because I need your aid. The lion and mouse, I murmured. Why, yes, if you will. And this man is the husband of your sister. I exclaimed, almost involuntarily. Does that imply a doubt of what I have said? He flashed, his head thrown back, his brows drawn suddenly together. No, no, I hastened to assure him. He smiled softly. Madonna Lucrezia knows all, or nearly all, of what else she may need to learn. That letter will inform her. It is the last thread, the last not needed, before we can complete the net in which we are to hold that tyrant. Now, will you bear the letter? Would I bear it? Dear God, to achieve the end in view, I would have spent my remaining days in Motley, making sport for grooms and kitchen wenches. Some such answer did I make him, and he smiled his satisfaction. You shall journey as you are, he bade me. I am guided by my sister, assured that the coat of a fool is stouter protection than the best hauberk ever tempered. When you have done your errand, come you back to me, and you shall have employment better suited to one who bears the name of Biancamont. You may depend upon me in this, my lord. I promise gravely. I shall not fail you. It is well, said he, and those wondrous eyes of his rested again upon my face. How soon can you set out? At once, my lord. Does not the byword say that a fool makes little preparation for a journey? He nodded and moved to a coffer, a beautiful piece of Venetian work in ultramarine and gold. From this, he took a heavy bag. There, said he, you will find the best of all traveling companions. I thanked him and set the bag on the crook of my left arm, and by its weight I knew how true he was to the notorious splendor of his race. And this, said he, is a talisman that may serve to help you out of any evil plight, and open many a door that you may find locked. And he handed me a signet ring on which was graven the steer, that is the emblem of the house of Borgia. He raised aloft a hand on which was glistening the sacred amethyst, 2 fingers crooked and 2 erect. Wondering what this should mean, I stared inquiry. Kneel, he bade me, and realizing what he would be about, I sank onto my knees whilst he murmured the apostolic benediction over my bowed head. The rushes of the floor were the only witnesses of the smile that crept to my lips at the sudden assumption of his churchly office by that most worldly prince. Chapter 2. The liveries of Sant'Afer. Such preparations as I had to make were soon complete. Although it was agreed that I was to travel in the motley, yet, in my lately born shame of that apparel, I decided that I would conceal it as best might be, revealing it only should the need arise. Moreover, it was incumbent that I should afford myself more protection against the inclement January night than that of my foliated cape, my crested cap, and silken hose. So, a black cloak, heavy and ample, a broad-brimmed hat, and a pair of riding boots of untanned leather were my further equipment. In the lining of one of those boots, I concealed the Lord Cesari's package, his money, some 20 ducats, I carried in a belt about my waist, and his ring I set boldly on my finger. Few moments did it need me to make ready, yet fewer, it seems, would the Borgia impatience have had me employ, for scarce was I booted when someone knocked at my door. I opened, and there entered a very mountain of a man, whose corset flashed back the yellow light of my tapers, as might have done a mirror, and whose harsh voice barked out to ask if I was ready. I had had some former acquaintance with this fellow, having first met him during the previous year, on the occasion of the court of Pesaro's sojourn at Rome. His name was Ramiro del Orca, and throughout the papal army it stood synonymous for masterfulness and grim brutality. He was, as I have said, an enormous man of prodigious bodily strength, heavy, yet of good proportions. Of his face one gathered the impression of a blazing furnace. His cheeks and nose were of a vivid red, and still more fiery was the hair, now hidden neath his morion, and the beard that tapered to a dagger's point. His very eyes kept tune with the red harmony of his ferocious countenance, for the whites were ever bloodshot as a drunkard's, which, with no want of truth, men said he was. "Come," grunted that fiery, self-sufficient vassal. "Be stirring, Sir Fool. I have orders to see you to the gates. There's a horse ready saddled for you. It is the Lord Cardinal's parting gift. Resolve me now, which will be the greater ass, the one that rides or the one that is ridden." "O monstrous riddle," I exclaimed as I took up my cloak and hat. "Who am I that I should solve it?" "It baffles you, Sir Fool," quoth he. "In very truth it does." I ruefully wagged my head, so that my bells set up a jangle, for the rider is a man and the ridden a horse. But I pursued in that backbiting strain, which is the very essence of the jester's wit. Were you to make a trio of us, including Messer Ramiro del Orca, captain in the army of His Holiness, no doubt would then afflict me. I should never hesitate which of the three to pronounce the ass. "What shall that mean?" he asked, with darkening brows. That its meaning proves obscure to you confirms a verdict I was hinting at. I taunted him, for asses are notoriously of dull perceptions. Then stepping forward briskly, "Come, sir," I sharply urged him, "whilst we engage upon this pretty play of wit, His Excellency's business waits, which is an ill thing. Where is this horse you spoke of?" He showed me his strong, white teeth in a very evil smile. "Were it not for that same business," he began, "you would do fine things, I am assured." I interrupted him. "Would I not?" he snarled. "By the host, I should be wringing your pert neck, or laying bare your bones of thong of bullock hide. You ill-conditioned fool." I looked at him with pleasant, smiling eyes. "You confirm the opinion that is popularly held of you," said I. "What may that be?" quoth he, his eyes very evil. "In Rome, I'm told, they call you hangman." He growled in his throat like an angered cur, and his hands were jerked to the level of his breast, the fingers bending talon-wise. "Body of God," he muttered fiercely, "I'll teach one fool at least." "Let us cease these pleasantries, I entreat you." I laughed. "Saints defend me. If your mood incline to raillery, you'll find your match in some lad of the stables. As for me, I have not the time, had I the will, to engage you further. Let me remind you that I would be gone." The reminder was well timed. He bethought him of the journey I must go, on which he was charged to see me safely started. "Come on, then," he growled, in a white heat of passion that was only curbed by the consideration of that slender, pale young cardinal, his master. Still, some of his rage he vented in roughly taking me by the collar of my doublet, and dragging me almost headlong from the room, and so down a flight of steps out into the courtyard. Meet treatment for a fool, a treatment to which time might have inured me. For had I not for 3 years already been exposed to rough usage of this kind at the hands of every man above the rank of groom? And had I once rebelled in act as I did in soul, and used the strength wherewith God endowed me to punish my ill users, a whip would have reminded me into what sorry slavery had I sold myself when I put on the motley. It had been snowing for the past hour, and the ground was white in the courtyard when we descended. At our appearance there was a movement of serving men, and a fall of hoofs, muffled by the snow. Some held torches that cast a ruddy glare upon the all-encompassing whiteness, and a groom was leading forward a horse that was destined to bear me. I donned my broad-brimmed hat, and wrapped my cloak about me. Some murmurs of farewell caught my ears, from those minions with whom I had herded during my 3 days at the Vatican. Then Messer del Orca thrust me forward. "Mount, fool, and be off," he rasped. I mounted and turned to him. He was a surly dog. If ever surly dog wore human shape, and the shape was the only human thing about Captain Ramiro. "Brother, farewell," I simpered. "No brother of yours, fool," snarled he. "True, my cousin only. The fool of art is no brother to the fool of nature." "A whip," he roared to his grooms. "Fetch me a whip." I left him calling for it, as I urged my nag across the snow and over the narrow drawbridge. Beyond, I stayed a moment to look over my shoulder. They stood gazing after me, a group of some half-dozen men, looking black against the whiteness of the ground. Behind them rose the brown walls of the rocca illumined by the flare of torches, from which the smell of rosin reached my nostrils as I paused. I waved my hat to them in token of farewell, and digging my spurless heels into the flanks of my horse, I ambled down to the biting wind and drifting snow into the town. The streets were deserted and dark, save for the ray that here fell from a window, and there stole through the chink of a door to glow upon the snow in earnest of the snug warmth within. Silence reigned, broken only by the moan of the wind under the eaves. For although it was no more than approaching the second hour of night, yet who but the wight whom necessity compelled will be abroad in such weather? All night I rode despite that weather's foulness, a foulness that might have given pause to one whose haste to bear a letter was less attuned to his own supreme desires. Betimes next morning I paused at a small locanda on the road to Magliano, and there I broke my fast and took some rest. My horse had suffered by the journey more than had I, and I would have taken a fresh one at Magliano, but there was none to be had. So they told me, this side of Narni, wherefore I was forced to set out once more upon that poor jaded beast that had carried me all night. It was high noon when I came, at last, to Narni, the last league of the journey accomplished at a walk, for my nag could go no faster. Here I paused to dine, but here again they told me that no horses might be had, and so, leading by the bridle of the animal I dared no longer ride, lest I should kill it outright. I entered the territory of Urbino on foot, and trudged wearily amain to the snow that was some inches deep by now. In this miserable fashion I covered the 7 leagues, or so, to Spoleto, where I arrived exhausted as night was falling. There, at the Osteria del Sol, I supped and lay. I found a company of gentlemen in the common room, who upon espying my motley, when I had thrown off my sodden cloak and hat, pressed me, willy-nilly, into amusing them. And so I spent the night at my fool's trade, giving them drolleries from the works of Boccaccio and Sacchetti, the horn books of all jesters. I obtained a fresh horse next morning, and I set out betimes, intending to travel with a better speed. The snow was thick and soft at first, but as I approached the hills it grew more crisp. Overhead the sky was of an unbroken blue, and for all that the air was sharp there was warmth in the sunshine. All day I rode hard, and never rested until towards nightfall I found myself on the spurs of the Apennines in the neighborhood of Gualdo, the better half of my journey well accomplished. The weather had changed again at sunset. It was snowing anew, and the north wind was howling like a choir of the damned. Before me gleamed the lights of a little wayside tavern, and since it might suit me better to lie there than to journey on to Gualdo, I drew rein before that humble door and got down from my wearied horse. Despite the early hour, the door was already barred, for the bedding of travelers formed no part of the traffic of so lowly a house as this nameless, wayside wine shop. Theirs was a trade that ended with the daylight. Nevertheless, I was assured they could be made to find me a rag of straw to lie on, and so I knocked boldly with my whip. The taverner who opened for me, and stood a moment surveying me by the light of the torch he held aloft, was a slim, mild-mannered man, not over-clean. Behind him surged the figure of his wife, just such a woman as you might look to find made of such a man, broad and tall of frame, and most scurvily cross-grained of face. It may well be that had he bid me welcome, she had driven me back into the night. But since he made some demur when I asked for lodging and protested that in his house was but accommodation too rude to offer my magnificence, the woman thrust him aside and loudly bade me enter. I obeyed her readily, hat on head and cloak about me, lest my interest should suffer were my trade disclosed. I bade the man see to my horse, and then, escorted by the woman, I made my way to the single room above, which, in obedience to my demand, she made haste to set at my convenience. It was an evil-smelling, squalid hole, a bed of wattles in a corner, and in the center a greasy table with a 3-legged stool and a crazy chair beside it. The floor was black with age and filth, and broken everywhere by rat-holes. She set her noisome, smoking oil lamp on the table, and with some apology for the rudeness of the chamber, she asked in tones almost defiant if my excellency would be content. "Perforce," said I ungraciously, perceiving surliness to be the key to the respect of such a creature. "A king might thank heaven for a kennel on such a night as this." She bent her back in a clumsy bow, and with a growing humility wondered had I supped. I had not, but sooner would I have starved than have been poisoned by such foulnesses as they might have set before me. So I answered her that all I needed was a cup of wine, when she had brought me that, and at last I was alone. I closed the door. It had no lock, nor any sort of fastening, so I set the three-legged stool against it that it might give me warning of intrusion. Next I threw off my cloak and hat and boots, and all dressed as I flung myself upon my miserable couch. But jaded though I might be, it was not yet my intent to sleep. Now that the half of my journey was accomplished, I found myself beset by doubts which had not before assailed me, touching the manner in which this mission of mine was to be accomplished. It would prove no easy thing for me to penetrate unnoticed into the town of Pesaro, much less into the Sforza court, where for 3 years I had pursued my fool's trade. There was scarce a man, a woman, or a child in the entire domains of Giovanni Sforza to whom Boccadoro, the fool, was not known, and many of Villano, who had never noticed the features of the Lord of Pesaro, could have told you the very color of his jester's eyes, which, after all, is no strange thing, for, sad reflection, in a world in which wisdom may be overlooked, folly goes never disregarded. The garments I wore might be well enough to journey in, but if I would gain the presence of Lucrezia Borgia, I must see that I arrived in others. And then my thoughts wandered into speculation. What might be this momentous letter that I carried? What was the secret traffic twixt Cesare Borgia and his sister? Since Cesare had said that it meant the ruin of Giovanni Sforza, a ruin so utter, so complete, and humiliating that it must provoke the scornful mirth of all Italy, the knowledge of it must soon be mine. Meanwhile, I was an agent of that ruin. Dear God, how that reflection warmed me. What joy I took in the thought that, though he knew it not, nor could come and know it, I, Lazzaro Biancamont, whom he had abused and whose spirit he had broken, was become a tool to expedite the work of abasement and destruction that was ripening for him. And realizing all this, that letter I vowed to heaven I would carry, suffering no obstacle to daunt me, suffering nothing to turn me from my path. And then another voice seemed to arise within me, to cry out impatiently, "Yes, yes, but how?" I rose, and approaching the table, I took up the jug of wine and poured myself a draught. I drank it off, and cast the dregs at an inquisitive rat that had thrust its head above the boards. Then I quenched the light, and flung myself once more upon my bed, in the hope that darkness would prove a stimulant to thought and bring me to the solution I was seeking. It brought me sleep instead. Unconsciously I sank to it, my riddle all unsolved. I did not wake until the pale sun of that January morning was drawing the pattern of my lattice on the ceiling. The stormy night had been succeeded by a calm and sunlit day, and by its light the place wore a more loathsome look than it had done last night, so that at the very sight of it I leapt from my couch and grew eager to be gone. I set a ducat on the table, and going to the door, I called my hostess. The stairs creaked presently neath her portentous weight, and, panting slightly, she stood before me. At sight of me, for I was without my cloak, and my motley was revealed in the cold morning light, she cried out in amazement first, and then in rage, deeming me one of those parasites who tramp the world in the garb of folly, seeking here a dinner, there a bed, in exchange for some scurvy tumbling or some witless jests. "Asa di Cristo," was her cry. "Have I housed a fool? If I am the first you have housed, your tumbling ruin of a tavern has been a singularly choice resort. Woman, would you woman me?" she stormed. "Why, no," said I politely. "I was at fault. I'll keep the title for your husband. God help him." She smiled grimly. "And are these," she asked, with a ferocious sarcasm, "the jests with which you pay the score?" "Jests, quoth I, score? Pish! More eyes, less tongue would more befit a hostess who has never housed a fool." And with a splendid gesture, I pointed to the ducat gleaming on the table. At sight of the gold, her eyes grew big with greed. "My master," she began, and coming forward took the piece in her hand, to assure herself that she was not the dupe of magic. "A fool with gold," she marveled, "is a shame to his calling." I acknowledged. "Then get me a needle and a length of thread," said I. She scuttled off to do my bidding, like nothing so much as one of the rats that tenanted her unclean sty. She was back in a moment, all civility, and wondering whether there was a rent about me she might make bold to stitch. What a key to courtesy is gold! My master's! I drove her out, and eager to conciliate me. She went at once. With my own hands, I effected in my doublet the slight repair which it stood in need. Then I donned my hat and, cloak on shoulder, made my way below, calling for my horse as I descended. I scorned the wine they proffered me ere I departed. That last night's draught had quenched my thirst for ever of such grape juice as it was theirs to tender. I urged the taverner to hasten with my horse, and stood waiting in the squalid common room, my mind divided twixt impatience to resume the road to Pesaro and fresh speculations upon the means I was to adopt to enter it and yet save my neck, for this was now become an obsessing problem. As I stood waiting, there broke upon my ears the sound of an approaching cavalcade, the noise of voices and the soft fall of hoofs upon the thick snow carpet. The company halted at the door, and a loud, gruff voice was raised to cry, "Locandier, a foot sluggard." I stepped to the door, with very natural curiosity. A company of 4 mounted men escorting a mule litter, the curtains of which were drawn so that nothing might be seen of him or her that rode within. Grooms were those 4, as all the world might see at the first glance, and the livery they wore was that of the noble house of Santafier, the holy white flower of the quince being embroidered on the breasts of their gabardines. They bore upon them such signs of hard and hasty traveling that it was soon guessed they had spent the night in the saddle. Their horses were in a foam of sweat, and the men themselves were splashed with mud from foot to cap. Even as I was going forward to regard them, the taverner appeared, leading my horse by the bridle. Now adding in the traveler that arrives is ever of more importance than he that departs. At sight of those horsemen, the taverner forgot my impatience, for he paused about and welcomed the one that seemed a leader. "Most magnificent," said he to that liveried hind, "command me. We need a guide," the fellow answered with an ill grace. "A guide, illustrious," quoth the host. "A guide?" "I said a guide, fool," answered the groom. "Heard you never of such animals? We need a man who knows the hills, to lead us by the shortest road to Cagley." The taverner shook his gray head stupidly. He bowed again until I fancied I could hear the creak of his old joints. "Here be no guides, magnificent," he deplored. "Perhaps at Gualdo." "Animal," was a retort. "For true courtesy commend me to a lackey. It is not our wish to pursue the road as far as Gualdo, else had we not stopped at this kennel of yours." I scarce know what it could have been that moved me to act as I then did. For in the truth, the manner of that rascal of a groom was little prepossessing, and his master, I doubted, could be little better that he left the fellow to hector it thus over that wretched tavern oaf. But I stepped forward. "Did you say that you were journeying to Cagley?" questioned I. He eyed me sourly, suspicion writ athwart his round, ill-favored face, but my motley was hidden from his sight. My cloak, my hat and boots allowed not my true condition to appear, and might as well have covered a lordling as a jester. Yet his inveterate surliness the rascal could not wholly conquer. "What may be the purpose of your question?" he growled. "To serve your master, whoever he may be," I answered him serenely, "although it is a service I do not press upon him. I, too, am journeying to Cagley, and like yourselves, I am in haste and go the shorter way across the hills, with which I am well acquainted. If it so please you to follow me, your need of a guide may thus be satisfied." It was the tone to take if I would be respected. Had I proposed that we should journey in company, I should not have earned me the half of the deference which was accorded to my haughtily granted leave that they might follow me if they so chose. With marked submission did he give me thanks in his master's name. I mounted and set out, and at my heels came now the litter and its escort. Thus did we quit the plain and breast the slopes, where the snow grew deeper and firmer underfoot as we advanced. And as I went, still plaguing my mind to devise a means by which I might penetrate the court of Pesaro, little did I dream that the matter was being solved for me, the solution having begun with my offer to guide that company across the hills. Chapter 3. Madonna Paula. We gained the heights in the forenoon, and there we dismounted and paused a while to breathe our horses ere we took the path that was to lead us down to Cagley. The air was sharp and cold, for all that overhead was spread a cloudless, cobalt dome of sky, and the sun poured down its light upon the wide expanse of snow-clad earth, of a whiteness so dazzling as to be hurtful to the sight. Hitherto I had ridden stolidly ahead, as unheeding of that following company as if I had been unconscious of its existence. But now that we paused, their fat, white-faced leader, whose name was Jacopo, approached me and sought to draw me into conversation. I yielded readily enough, for I scented a mystery about that closely curtained litter, and mysteries are ever provoking to such a mind as mine. For all that it might profit me naught to learn who rode there, and why with all this haste, yet these were matters, I confess, on which my curiosity was aroused. Are you journeying beyond Cagley? I asked him presently, in an idle tone. He cocked his head and eyed me aslant, the suspicion in his eyes confirming the existence of the mystery I scented. Yes, he answered, after a pause. We hope to reach Urbino before night. And you? Are you journeying far? That far at least, I answered him, emulating the caution he had shown. And then, ere more might pass between us, the leather curtains of the litter were sharply drawn aside. At the sound I turned my head, and so far was the vision different from that which, for no reason that I can give, I had expected, that I was stricken with surprise and wonder. A lady, a very child, indeed, had leapt nimbly to the ground ere any of those grooms could offer her assistance. She was, I thought, the most beautiful woman that I had ever seen, and to one who had read the famous work of Messer Firenzuola on feminine beauty, it might seem, at first, that here stood the incarnation of that writer's catalogue of womanly perfections. She was of a good shape and stature, despite her tender years. Her face was oval, delicately featured, and of an ivory pallor. Her eyes, blue as the heavens overhead, were not the color most approved by Firenzuola, nor was her hair the golden brown which that arbiter commends. Had Firenzuola seen her, it may well be that he had altered or modified his views. She was sumptuously arrayed in a loose-sleeved kimona of gray velvet that was heavy with costly furs. Above the lens of fine linen on her head gleamed the gold thread of a jeweled net, and at her waist a girdle of surpassing richness, all set with gems, glowed like a thing of fire in the bright sunshine. She took a deep breath of the sharp, invigorating air, then looked about her, and espying me in conversation with Jacopo, she approached us across the gleaming snow. "Is this," she inquired, and her sweet, melodious voice was a perfect match to the graceful charm of her whole presence, "the traveler who so kindly consented to fill for us the office of a guide?" Jacopo answered briefly that I was that man. "I am in your debt, sir," she protested, with an odd earnestness. "You do not know how great a service you have rendered me. But if at any time Paolo Sforza di Sant'Afer may be able to discharge this obligation, you shall find me very willing." White-faced, black-browed Jacopo scowled at this proclamation of her identity. I made her a low bow and answered coldly, brusquely almost, for I hated the very name of Sforza and every living thing that bore it. "Madonna, you overrate my service. It so chanced that I was traveling this way." She looked more closely at me, as if she would have sought the reason of my churlish tone, and I was strangely thankful that she could not see the motley worn by the muffled stranger who confronted her. No doubt she accounted me a clown, whose nature inclined to surliness, and so she turned away, telling Jacopo that as soon as the horses were breathed they might push on. "We must rest them yet a while, Madonna," answered he, "if they ought to carry us as far as Cagley. Heaven send that we may obtain fresh cattle there, else is all lost." Her frown proclaimed how much his words displeased her. "You forget that if there are no horses for us, neither are there any for those others." And she waved her hand towards the valley below and the road by which we had come. From this, and from what was said, I gathered that they were a party of fugitives with pursuers at their heels. "They have a warrant which we have not," was Jacopo's answer, gloomily delivered, "and they will seize cattle where they can find it." With a little gesture of impatience, more at his fears than at the peril that aroused them, she moved away towards her litter. "Your horse would be better for the loan of your cloak, Sir Stranger," said Jacopo to me. I knew him to be right, but shrugged my shoulders. "Better the horse should die of cold than I answered gruffly, and turning from him, I set myself to pace the snow and stir the blood that was chilling in my veins. There was a beauty in the white, sunlit landscape spread before me that compelled my glance. To some it might compare but ill with the luxuriant splendor that is of the vernal season, but to me there was a wondrously impressive charm about that solemn, silent, virginal expanse of snow, expressionless as a sphinx, and imposing and majestic by virtue of that very lack of expression. From Fabriano at our feet was spread to the east the broad plain that lies twixt the Asino and the Massone, as far as Mount Comoro, which, in the distance, lifted its round shoulder from the haze of sea. To the west the country lay under the same winding sheet of snow as far as I might range, to the towers of distant Perugia, to the lake Trasimeno, a silver sheen that broke the white monotony, to Etruscan Cortona, perched like an eyrie on its mountain top, and to the line of Tuscan hills like heavy, low-lying clouds upon the blue horizon. Lost was I in the contemplation of that scene when a cry, succeeded by a volley of horrid blasphemy, drew my attention of a sudden to my companions. They stood grouped together, and their eyes were on the road by which we had scaled those heights. Their first expression of loud astonishment had been succeeded by an utter silence. I stepped forward to command a better view of what they contemplated, and in the plain below, midway between Narni and the slopes, a mile or so behind us, I caught a glitter as of 100 mirrors in the sunshine. A company of some dozen men-at-arms it was, riding briskly along the tracks we had left behind us in the snow. Could these be the pursuers? Even as I formed the question in my mind, the lady's silvery voice behind me put it into words. She had drawn aside the curtains of her litter, and she was leaning out, her eyes upon those dancing points of brilliance. "Madonna," cried one of her grooms, in a quaver of alarm, "they are Borgia soldiers." "Your fear is father to that opinion," she answered scornfully. "How can you descry it at this distance?" Now, either God had given that knave an eagle's sight, or else, as she suggested, fear spurred his imagination and begot his certainty of what he thought he saw. "The leader's bannerall bears the device of a red bull," he answered promptly. I thought she paled a little, and her brows contracted. "In God's name, let us get forward then," cried Jacopo. "Orsu, to horse, knaves." No second bidding did they need. In the twinkling of an eye, they were in the saddle, and one of them had caught the bridle of the leading mule of the litter. Jacopo called to me to lead the way with him, with no more ceremony than if I had been one of themselves. But I made no ado. A chase is an interesting business, whatever your point of view, and if a greater safety lies with a hunter, there is a keener excitement with the hunted. Down that steep and slippery hillside we blundered, making for Cagley at a pace in which there lay a myriad-fold more danger than could menace us from any party of pursuers. But fear was spur and whip to the unreasoning minds of those poltroons, and so from the danger behind us we fled, and courted more deadly and certain peril in the fleeing. At first I sought to remonstrate with Jacopo, but he was deaf to the wisdom that I spoke. He turned upon me a face which terror had rendered whiter than its natural habit, white as the egg of a duck, with a hint of blue or green behind it. I had, besides, an ugly impression of teeth and eyeballs. "Death is behind us, sir," he snarled. "Let us get on." "Death is more assuredly before you," I answered grimly. "If you will court it, go your way. As for me, I am over young to break my neck and be left on the mountainside to fatten crows. I shall follow at my leisure." "Gesù!" he cried through chattering teeth. "Are you a coward, then?" The taunt would have angered me had his condition been other than it was. But coming from one so possessed of the devil of terror, it did no more than provoke my mirth. "Come on, then, valiant renegade." I laughed at him, and on we went, our horses now plunging, now sliding down yard upon yard moving snow, snorting and trembling, more reasoning far than these rational animals that bestrode them. Twice did it chance that a man was flung from his saddle. Yet I know not what prayers Madonna may have been uttering in her litter, to obtain for us the miracle of reaching the plain with never so much as a broken bone. Thus far had we come, but no farther, it seemed, was it possible to go. The horses, which by dint of slipping and sliding had encompassed the descent at a good pace, were so winded that we could get no more than an amble out of them, saving mine, which was tolerably fresh. At this a new terror assailed the timorous Jacopo. His head was ever turned to look behind, unfailing index of a frightened spirit. His eyes were ever on the crest of the hills, expecting at every moment to behold the flash of pursuer's steel. The end soon followed. He drew rein and called a halt, sullenly sitting his horse like a man deprived of wit, which is to pay him the compliment of supposing that he ever had wit to be deprived of. Instantly the curtain rings rasped, and Madonna Paola's head appeared, her voice inquiring the reason of this fresh delay. Sullenly Jacopo moved his horse nearer, and sullenly he answered her, "Madonna, our horses are done. It is useless to go farther." "Useless?" she cried, and I had an instance of how sharply could ring the voice that I had heard so gentle. Of what do you talk, you knave? Ride on at once. It is vain to ride on, he answered obdurately, insolence rising in his voice. Another half league, another league at most, and we are taken. Cagley is less than a league distant, she reminded him. Once there, we can obtain fresh horses. You will not fail me now, Jacopo. There will be delays, perforce, at Cagley, he reminded her. And meanwhile, there are these to guide the Borgia Sperry. And he pointed to the tracks we were leaving in the snow. She turned from him and addressed herself to the other three. You will stand by me, my friends, she cried. Jacopo here is a coward, but you are better men. They stirred, and one of them was momentarily moved into a faint semblance of valor. We will go with you, Madonna, he exclaimed. Let Jacopo remain behind, if so he will. But Jacopo was a very ill-conditioned rogue, neither true himself nor tolerant, it seemed, of truth in others. You will be hanged for your pains when you are caught, he exclaimed. As caught you will be, and within the hour, if you would save your necks. Stay here and make surrender. His speech was not without effect upon them, beholding which, Madonna leapt from the litter, the better to confront them. The corners of her sensitive little mouth were quivering now with the emotion that possessed her, and on her eyes there was a film of tears. You cowards, she blazed at them. You hinds, that lacked the spirit even to run. Were I asking you to stand and fight in defense of me, you could not show yourselves more palsied. I was a fool, she sobbed, stamping her foot so that the snow squelched under it. I was a fool to entrust myself to you. Madonna, answered one of them, if flight could still avail us, you should not find us stubborn, but it were useless. I tell you again, Madonna, that when I espied them from a hilltop yonder, they were but a half league behind. Soon we shall have them over the mountain, and we shall be seen. Fool, she cried, a half league behind, you say, and you forget that we were on the summit, and they had yet to scale it. If you but press on, we shall treble that distance, at least, ere they begin the descent. Besides, Jacopo, she added, turning again to the leader, you may be at fault. You may be scared by a shadow. You may be wrong in accounting them our pursuers. The man shrugged his shoulders, shook his head, and grunted. Arnaldo there made no mistake. He told us what he saw. Now heaven help a poor, deserted maid, who set her trust in curs, she exclaimed, between grief and anger. I had been no better than those hinds of hers had I remained unmoved. I have said that I hated the very name of Sforza. But what had this tender child to do with my wrongs, that she should be brought within the compass of that hatred? I had inferred that her pursuers were the house of Borgia, and in a flash it came to me that were I so inclined I might prove, by virtue of the ring I carried, the one man in Italy to serve her in this extremity, and to be of service to her. Her winsome beauty had already inflamed me. For there was I know not what about this child that seemed to take me in its toils, and so wrought upon me that there and then I would have risked my life in her good service. Oh, you may laugh who read. Indeed, deep down in my heart I laughed myself, I think, at the heroics to which I was yielding, I, the fool, most base of lackeys, over a damsel of the noble house of Sant'Afier. It was shame of my motley, maybe, that caused me to draw my cloak more tightly about me as I urged forward my horse, until I come into their midst. Lady, said I bluntly and without preamble, can I assist you? I have inferred your case from what I have overheard. All eyes were on me, gaping with surprise, hers no less than her groom's. What can you do alone, sir? She asked, her gentle glance upraised to mine. If, as I gather, your pursuers are servants of the house of Borgia, I may do something. They are, she answered, without hesitation, some eagerness, even investing her tones. It may seem an odd thing that this lady should so readily have taken a stranger into her confidence, yet reflect upon the parlous condition in which she found herself, deserted by her dispirited grooms, her enemies hot upon her heels. She was in no case to trifle with assistance, or to despise and offer services, however frail it might seem. With both hands she clutched at the slender hope I brought her in the hour of her despair. Sir, she cried, if indeed it lies in your power to help me, you could not find it in your heart to be sparing of that power, did you, but know the details of my sorry circumstance. That Power, Madonna! It may be that I have, said I. And at those words of mine, her servants seemed to honor me with a greater interest. They leaned forward on their horses and eyed me with eyes grown of a sudden hopeful. And I continued, if you have utter faith in me, I see a way to render doubly certain your escape. She looked up into my face, and what she saw there may have reassured her that I promised no more than I could accomplish. For the rest, she had to choose between trusting me and suffering capture. Sir, said she, I do not know you, nor why you should interest yourself in the concerns of a desolated woman. But heaven knows, I am in no case to stand pondering the aid you offer, nor indeed do I doubt the good faith that moves you. Let me hear, sir, how you would propose to serve me. Whence are you? I inquired. From Rome, she informed me without hesitation. To seek at my cousin's court of Pesaro shelter from a persecution to which the Borgia family is submitting me. At her cousin's court of Pesaro. An odd coincidence, this. And while I was pondering it, it flashed into my mind that by helping her I might assist myself. Had aught been needed, oh, strengthen my purpose to serve her, I had it now. Yet, said I, surprise invested my voice, at Pesaro there's Madonna Lucrezia of that same house of Borgia. She smiled away the doubt my words implied. Madonna Lucrezia is my friend, said she, as sweet and gentle friend as ever woman had, and she will stand by me even against her own family. Since she was satisfied of that, I waived the point and returned to what was of more immediate interest. And you fled, said I with ease, and I indicated her attendants. Not content to leave the clearest of tracks behind you in the snow, you have had yourself attended by 4 grooms in the livery of Sant'Afier, so that by asking a few questions any that were so inclined might follow you with ease. She opened wide her eyes at that. Oftentimes have I observed that it needs a fool to teach some elementary wisdom to the wise ones of this world. I leapt from my saddle and stood in the road beside her, the bridle on my arm. Listen now, Madonna. If you would make good your escape, it first imports that you should rid yourself of this valiant escort, separate from it for a little while. Take you my horse. It is a very gentle beast. It will carry you with safety and ride on alone to Cagley. Alone? Quoth she in some surprise. Why, yes, I answered gruffly. What of that? At the end of the full moon, ask for the hostess, and tell her that you are to await an escort there, begging her, meanwhile, to place you under her protection. She is a worthy soul, or else I do not know one, and she will befriend you readily. But see to it that you tell her nothing of your affairs. And then, she inquired eagerly, then wait you there until tonight, or even until tomorrow morning, for these knaves to rejoin you to the end that you may resume your journey. But we, began Jacopo, sending his protest. I cut him short. You 4, said I, shall escort me, for I shall replace Madonna in the litter. You shall escort me towards Fabriano. Thus shall we draw the pursuit upon ourselves, and assure your lady a clear road of escape. They swore most roundly and with great circumstance of oaths that they would lend themselves to no such madness, and it took me some moments to persuade them that I was possessed of a talisman that should keep us all from harm. Were it otherwise, dolts, do you think I should be eager to go with you? Would any chance wayfarer so wantonly imperil his neck for the sake of a lady with whom he can scarce be called acquainted? It was an argument that had weight with them, as indeed it must have had with the dullest. I flashed my ring before their eyes. This escutcheon, said I, is the shield that shall stand between us and danger from any of the house that bears these arms. Thus I convinced and wrought upon them, until they were ready to obey me, the more ready since any alternative was really to be preferred to their present situation. In danger they already stood from those that followed, as they well knew, and now it seemed to them that by obeying one who was armed with such credentials, it might be theirs to escape that danger. But even as I was convincing them, by the same arguments was I sowing doubts in the lady's subtler mind. You are attached to that house? Quoth she, in accents of mistrust. She wanted to say more. I saw it in her eyes that she was wondering was there treachery underlying an action so singularly disinterested as to justify suspicion. Madonna, said I, if you would save yourself, I implore that you will trust me. Very soon your pursuers will be appearing on those heights, and then your chance of flight will be lost to you. I will ask you but this. Did I propose to betray you into their hands? Could I have done better than have left you with your grooms?" Her face lighted. A sunny smile broke on me from her heavenly eyes. "I should have thought of that," said she, and what more she would have added I put off by urging her to mount, sitting the man's saddle as best she might. Well enough, indeed, to fill us all with surprise and admiration. She took her leave of me with pretty words of thanks, which again I interrupted. "You have but to follow the road," said I, "and it will bring you straight to Cagley. The distance is a short league, and you should come there safely. Farewell, Madonna." "May I not know," she asked at parting, "the name of him that has so generously befriended me?" I hesitated a second. "Then they call me Boccadoro," answered I. "If your mouth be as truly golden as your heart, then are you well named," said she. Then, gathering her mantle about her and waving me farewell, she rode off without so much as a glance at the cowardly hinds who had failed her in the hour of her need. A moment I stood watching her as she cantered away in the sunshine. Then, stepping to the litter, I vaulted in. "Now, rogues," said I to the escort, "strike me that road to Fabriano." "I know you not, sir," protested Jacopo. "But this I know, that if you intend us treachery, you shall have my knife in your gullet for your pains." "Fool!" I scorned him. "Since when has it been worth the while of any man to betray such creatures as are you? Plague me no more. Be moving, else I leave you to your coward's fate." It was a tone best understood by hinds of their lily-livered quality. It quelled their faint spark of mutiny, and a moment later one of those knaves had caught the bridle of the leading mule, and the litter moved forward, while Jacopo and the others came on behind it as brisk a pace as their weary horses would yield. In this guise we took the road south, in the direction opposite to that traveled by the lady. As we rode, I summoned Jacopo to my side. "Take your daggers," I bade him, "and rip me that blazon from your coats. See that you leave no sign about you proclaim you of the house of Santafier, or all is lost. It is a precaution you would have taken earlier, if God had given you the wit of a grasshopper." He nodded that he understood my order, and scowled his disapproval of my comment on his wit. For the rest, they did my bidding there and then. Having satisfied myself that no betraying sign remained about them, I drew the curtains of my litter, and reclining there I gave myself up to pondering the manner in which I should greet the Borgia Sperry when they overtook me. From that I passed on to the contemplation of the position in which I found myself, and the thing that I had done, and the proportions of the jest that I was perpetrating afforded me no little amusement. It was a burla not unworthy the peerless gifts of Boccadoro, and a fitting one on which to close his wild career of folly. For had I not vowed that Boccadoro, I would be no more once the errand on which I traveled was accomplished. By Cesare Borgia's grace, I looked to. A sudden jolt brought me back to the immediate present, and the realization that in the last few moments we had increased our pace. I put out my head. "Jacopo!" I shouted. He was at my side in an instant. "Why are we galloping?" "They are behind," he answered, and fear was again overspreading his fat face. We caught a glimpse of them as we mounted the last hill. "You caught a glimpse of whom?" quoth I. "Why, of the Borgia soldiers." "Animal," I answered him. "What are we to do with them? They may have mistaken us for some party of which they are in pursuit. But since we are not that party, let your jaded beast travel at a more reasonable speed. We do not wish to have the air of fugitives." He understood me, and I was obeyed. For a half hour we rode at a more gentle pace. That was about the time they took to come up with us. Still a league or so from Fabriano, we heard their cantering hoofs crushing the snow, and then a loud imperious voice shouting to us a command to stay. Instantly we brought up in unconcerned obedience, and they thundered alongside with cries of triumph at having run their prey to earth. I cast aside my hat, and thrust my motleyed head through the curtains with jangle of bells, to inquire into the reason of this halt. Whom my appearance astounded the more, whether the lackeys of Santafier or the Borgia men-at-arms that now encircled us, I cannot guess. But in the crowd of faces that confronted me, there was not one but wore a look of deep amazement. Chapter 4. The cousining of Ramiro. The cavalcade that had overtaken us proved to number some 20 men-at-arms, whose leader was no less a person than Ramiro del Orca, that same mountain of man who had attended my departure from the Vatican 3 nights ago. From the circumstance that so important a personage should have been charged with the pursuit of the Lady of Santafier, I infer that great issues were at stake. He was clad in mail and leather, and from his lance fluttered the bannerole bearing the Borgia arms, which had announced his quality to Madonna's servants. At sight of me, his bloodshot eyes grew round with wonder, and for a little season a deathly calm preceded the thunder of his voice. "Sainted host," he roared at last, "what trickery may this be?" And sidling his horse nearer, he tore aside the curtains of my litter. Out of faces pale as death the craving grooms looked on, to behold me reclining there, my cloak flung down across my legs to hide my boots, and my motley garb of red and black and yellow all revealed. I believe their astonishment by far surpassed the captain's own. "You are choicely met, Ser Ramiro," I greeted him. Then, seeing that he only stared and made no shift to speak, "Maybe," quoth I, "you'll explain why you detained me. I am in haste." "Explain," he thundered. "Sang di Cristo, the burden of explaining lies with you. What make you here?" "Why," answered I, in tones of deep astonishment, "I am about the business of the Lord Cardinal of Valencia, our master." "Davvero," he jeered. He stretched out a mighty paw and took me by the collar of my doublet. "Now, bethink you how you answer me, or there will be a fool the less in the world." Indeed, the world might spare more. He scowled at my pleasantry. To him, apparently, the situation afforded no scope for philosophical reflections. "Where is the girl?" he asked abruptly. "Girl," quoth I, "what girl? Am I a mother abbess, that you should set me such a question?" Two dark lines showed between his brows. His voice quivered with passion. "I ask you again, where's the girl?" I laughed like one who was a little wearied by the entertainment provided for him. "Here be no girls, Messer Delorca," I answered him in the same tone. "Nor can I think what this babble of girls pretends." My seeming innocence and the assurance with which I maintained expression of it whispered a doubt into his mind. He released me and turned upon his men, a baffled look in his eyes. "Was not this the party?" he inquired ferociously. "Have you misled me, beasts?" "It seemed the party, illustrious," answered one of them. "Do you dare tell me that it seemed?" he roared, seeking to father upon them the blunder he was beginning to fear that he had made. "But what is the livery of these knaves?" "They wear none," someone answered him, and at that answer he seemed to turn limp and lose his fierce assurance. Then he bridled afresh. "Yet the party, I'll swear, is this," he insisted, and turning once more to me. "Explain, animal," he bade me in terrifying tones. "Explain, or by the host, be you ignorant or not, I'll have you hanged." I accounted it high time to take another tone with him. Hanging was a discomfort I was never less minded to suffer. "Draw nearer, fool," said I contemptuously, and at the epithet, so greatly did my audacity amaze him, he mildly did my bidding. "I know not what doubts are battling in your thick head, Sir Captain," I pursued, "but this I know, that if you persist in hindering me or commit the egregious folly of offering me violence, you will answer for it hereafter to the Lord Cardinal of Valencia. I am going upon a secret mission." And here I sank my voice to a whisper for his ears alone, "in the service of the house that hires you, as for yourself you might easily have inferred. Behold," and I revealed my ring. "Detain me longer at your peril." He must have had some notion of the fact that I was journeying in Cesare Borgia's service, and this coupled with the sight of that talisman effected in his manner a swift and wholesome change. Had I, arrayed in the panoply of Mother Church, defied the devil, my victory could not have been more complete. He looked about him like a man whose wits have been scattered suddenly to the four winds of heaven. "But this litter," he mumbled, riveting his dazed eyes upon me, "and these four knaves? Tell me," I questioned with sudden earnestness, "are you in quest of just such a party?" "That I am," he answered sharply, intelligence returning to his glance, inquiry burning in it. "And would the men, peradventure, be wearing the livery of the house of Santafier?" His quick assent came almost choked in a company of oaths. "Why then, if that be your quarry, you are but wasting time. Such a party passed us at the gallop about an hour ago." "It would be an hour, would it not, Jacopo?" "I should say an hour," answered the lackey dully. "In what direction?" came Ramiro's frenzied question. He doubted me no longer. In the direction of Fabriano, I should say. I answered, although it may well be that they were making for Sinigaglia. The road branches farther on. He waited for no more. Without word of thanks for the priceless information I had given him, he wheeled his horse and shouted a hoarse command to his followers. A moment later, and they were cantering past us, the snow flying beneath their hoofs. Within 5 minutes, the last of them had vanished round an angle of the road, and the only indication of the halt they had made was the broad path of dirty brown where their horses had crushed the snow. I had been an actor in few more entertaining comedies than The Cousining of Sarah Miro, and a witness of nothing that afforded me at once so much relief and relish as his abrupt departure. I sank back on the cushions of my litter and gave myself over to a burst of full-souled laughter, which was interrupted ere it was half done by Jacopo, who had dismounted and approached me. "You have fooled us finely," said he with venom. I quenched my laughter to regard him. Of what did he babble? Was he, and were his fellows too, so ungrateful as to bear a grudge against the man who had saved them? "You have fooled us finely," he insisted in a louder voice. "That knave is my trade," said I, "but it rather seems to me that it was Messer Ramiro del Orca whom I fooled." "Aye," he answered querulously, "but what when he discerns how you have played upon him? What when he discovers a trick by which you have thrown him off the scent? What when he returns?" "Spare me," I begged. "I am but indifferently skillful at conjecture." "Nay, but you shall answer me," he cried, livid with a passion that my bantering tone had quickened. "Can it be that you are indeed curious to know what will befall when he returns?" I questioned meekly. "I am," he snorted, with an angry twist of the lips. "It should be easy to gratify the morbid spirit of curiosity that actuates you. Remain here and await his return. Thus shall you learn." "That will not I," he vowed. "Nor I, nor I, nor I," chorused his followers. Then, why plague me with unprofitable questions? What concern is it of ours how Messer del Orca shall vent his wrath when he is disillusioned? Your duty now is to rejoin your mistress. Ride hard for Cagli. Seek her at the sign of the full moon, and then away for Pesaro. If you are brisk, you will gain the shelter of the Lord Giovanni Sforza's fortress long before Messer del Orca again picks up the scent. If, indeed, he ever does so. Jacopo laughed derisively till his fat body shook with the scornful mirth of him. "By my faith, I'm done with the business," he cried, and the other three expressed a very hearty agreement with that attitude. "How done with it?" I asked. "I shall make my way back across the hills, and so retrace my steps to Rome. I'll risk my head no more for any lady or any fool." "If you should ever chance to risk it for yourself," said I, with unmeasured scorn, "you'll risk it for the greatest fool and the cowardliest rogue that ever shamed the name of man. And your mistress? Is she to wait at Cagli until doomsday? If anywhere within the bulk of that elephant's body there lurks the heart of a rabbit, you'll get you to horse and ride to the help of that poor lady." They resented my tone and showed their resentment plainly. Messer Jacopo went the length of raising his hand to me. But I am a man of amazing strength, amazing inasmuch as being slender of shape, I do not have the air of it. Leaping suddenly from the litter, I caught that miserable vassal by the breast of his doublet, shook him once or twice, then tossed him headlong into a drift of snow by the roadside. At that they bared their knives and made shift to attack me. But I flung myself onto one of the mules of the litter, and showing them the stout Pistoja dagger that I carried, I presented with it a bold and truculent front, no one intimidated by their numbers. For the one though they were, they thought better of it. A moment they stood off, consulting among themselves. Then Jacopo mounted, and with some mocking counsel as to how I should dispose of the litter and the mules, they made off, no doubt, to find their way back to Rome. Jacopo, as I was afterward to discover, was Madonna Paola's purse-bearer, so that they would not lack for means. A while I stayed there, cursing them for the white-livered cravens that they were, and thinking of that poor child who had ridden on to Cagli, and who would await them in vain. There, on the mule, I sat in the noontide sunlight and pondered this, so absorbed in her affairs as to have grown forgetful of my own. At last I resolved to ride on to Cagli alone, and inform her that her men were fled. There was no time to lose, for as that rogue Jacopo had said, Ramiro del Orca might discover at any moment how he had been tricked, and return hotfoot to find me, and extort the truth from me by such means as I had no stomach for enduring. First, then, It was a moment thoroughly to efface our tracks, leaving no sign that might guide Monsieur Ramiro to repair the error into which I had tricked him. Slowly, says the proverb, one journeys far and safely. Slowly, then, did I consider. The escort was no doubt on its way back to Rome. If I could but rid myself of that cumbrous litter, Sir Ramiro would find himself mightily hard put to again pick up the trail. I remembered a ravine a little way behind, and I rode my mule back to that as fast as it would travel with the litter and the other mule attached to it. Arrived there, I unharnessed the beast on the very edge of that shallow precipice. Then, exerting all my strength, I contrived to roll the litter over. Down that steep incline it went, over and over, gathering more snow to itself at every revolution, and sinking at last into the drift at the bottom. There were signs enough to show its presence, but those signs would hardly be read by any but the sharpest eyes, or by such as might be looking for it in precisely such position. I must trust to luck that it escaped the notice of Messer Ramiro. But even if he did discover it, I did not think that it would tell him overmuch. That done, I resumed my hat and cloak, which I had retained, mounted once more, and urging the other mule along, I proceeded thus as fast as might be for a half-league or so in the direction of Cagley. That distance covered. Again I halted. There was not a soul in sight. I stripped one of the mules of all its harness, which I buried in the snow, behind a hedge. Then I drove the beast loose into a field. The peasant owner of that land might conclude upon the morrow that it had rained asses in the night, and now I was able to travel at a brisker pace. And in an hour or so I had passed a point where the road diverged, and I caught a glimpse of the four grooms, already high up in the hills which they were crossing. Whether they saw me or not I do not know, but with a last curse at their cowardice I put them from my mind, and cantered briskly on towards Cagley. It was a short league farther, and in little more than half an hour, my mule half dead, I halted at the door of the Full Moon. Flinging my reins to the ostler, I strode into the inn, swaddled in my cloak, and called for the hostess. The place was empty, as indeed all Cagley had seemed when I rode up. She came forward, a woman with a brown, full face and large, kindly eyes, and I asked her whether a lady had arrived there in safety that morning. At first she seemed mistrustful, but when I had assured her that I was in that lady's service, she frankly owned that Madonna was safe in her own room. Thither I allowed her to lead me, at once eager and reluctant. Eager with my own eyes to assure myself of her perfect safety. Reluctant that, since a man may not penetrate to a lady's chamber hat on head, by uncovering I must disclose my shameful trade. Yet there was nothing for it but a bold face, and as I mounted the stairs in the woman's wake, I told myself that I was doubly a fool to be tormented by qualms of such a nature. Hat in hand, I followed the hostess into Madonna's room. The lady rose from the window seat to greet me, her face pale and her gentle eyes wearing an anxious look. At sight of my head crowned with a crested, horned hood of folly, a frown of bewilderment drew her brows together, and she looked more closely to see whether I was indeed the man who had befriended her that morning in her extremity. In the eyes of the hostess, I caught a gleam of recognition. She knew me for the merry loon who had entertained her guests one night a fortnight since, when on my way from Pesaro to Rome. But before she could give expression to this discovery of hers, the lady spoke. "Leave us a while, my woman," she commanded. But I stayed the hostess as she was withdrawing. "This lady," said I, "will need an escort of 3 or 4 stout knaves upon a journey that she is going. She will be setting out as soon as may be." "But what are my grooms?" cried the lady. "Madonna, I informed her. They have deserted you. That is the reason of my presence here. You shall hear the story of it presently. Meanwhile, we must arrange to replace them." And I turned again to the hostess. She was standing in thought, a doubtful expression on her face. But as I looked at her, she shook her head. "There is no such escort be found today in Cagley," she made answer. "The town is all but empty, and every lusty man is either gone on the pilgrimage to the holy house of Loreto, or else is at Pesaro for the feast of the Epiphany." It was in vain that I protested that a couple of knaves might surely be found. She answered me that such as were in Cagley were there, because they would not be elsewhere. The lady's face grew clouded as she listened, for from my insistence, she shrewdly inferred that it imported to be gone. "There is your ostler," quoth I at last. "He will do for one. He is the only man I have. My husband and my sons are gone to Pesaro. Yet spare us this one, and you shall be well paid his services." But no bribe could tempt her to give way, and no doubt she was well advised, for she contended that there was work to be done such as was beyond her years and strength, and that if she sent her ostler off, as well might she close her in, a thing that was impossible. Here, then, was an obstacle with which I had not reckoned. It was impossible to send the lady off alone, to travel a distance of some 10 leagues, and the most of it by night, for she would make sure of escaping. She must journey now without pause until she came to Pesaro. And then, in a flash, it occurred to me that here lay the means, ready to my hand, by a veil which I might boldly re-enter Pesaro despite my banishment, and discharge my errand to Lucrezia Borgia. For, surely, considering the mission on which ostensibly I should be returning, as the savior and protector of his kinswoman, Giovanni Sforza could not enforce that ban against me. Next, I bethought me of the other aspect that the business wore. In fooling Ramiro, I had thwarted the Borgia ends. In rescuing Madonna Paula, I had perhaps set at naught the Cardinal of Valencia's aims. If so, what then? It would seem that because the lady's eyes were mild and sweet, and because her beauty had so deeply wrought upon me, I had indeed fooled away my chance of salvation from the life and trade that were grown hateful to me. For back to Rome and Cesare Borgia, I should dare go no more. Clearly I had burned my boats, and I had done it almost unthinkingly, acting upon the good impulse to befriend this lady, and never reckoning the cost down to its total. For all that the thing I had done and what I might yet do should offer me the means I needed to enter Pezzo, without danger to my neck, I did not see that I was to derive great profit in the end. Unless my profit lay in knowing that I had advanced the ruin of Giovanni Sforza by delivering my letter to Lucrezia. That at any rate was enough incentive clearly to define for me the line that I should take through this tangle into which the ever-jesting fates had thrust me. I was still at my thoughts, still pondering this most perplexing situation, the hostess standing silent by the door, when suddenly Madonna Paula spoke. "Sir," said she in faltering accents, I have not the right to ask you, and I stand already so deeply in your debt, not a doubt of it, but it will have inconvenienced you to have journeyed thus far to inform me of the flight of my grooms. Yet if you could—" She paused, timid of proceeding, and her glance fell. The hostess was all ears, struck by the respectful manner in which this very evidently noble lady addressed a fool. I opened the door for her. "You may leave us now," said I. "I will come to you presently." When she was gone, I turned once more to the lady, my course resolved upon. My hate had conquered my last doubt. What first imported was that I should get to Pesaro and to Madonna Lucrezia. "You were about to ask me," said I, "that I should accompany you to Pesaro." "I hesitated, sir," she murmured. I bowed respectfully. "There was not the need, Madonna," I assured her. "I am at your service." "But, Messer Boccadoro, I have no claim upon you." "Surely," said I, "the claim that every distressed lady has upon a man of heart. Let us say no more. It were best not to delay in setting out, although I can scarcely think that there is any imminent danger from Ramiro del Orca now." "Who is he?" she inquired. I told her, whereupon. "Did they come up with you?" she asked. "What passed between you?" Succinctly, I related what had chanced, and how I had sent Ramiro on a fool's errand, adding the particulars of the flight of her grooms, and of how I had rid myself of the litter and the second mule. She heard me, her eyes sparkling, and at times she clapped her hands with a glee that was almost childish, vowing that this was splendid, that was brave. I allayed what little fears remained her by pointing out how effectively we had effaced our tracks, and how vainly now Messer del Orca might beat the country in quest of a lady in a litter, escorted by 4 grooms. And now she beset me with fresh thanks and fresh expressions of wonder at my generous readiness to befriend her, a wonder all devoid of suspicion touching the single-mindedness of my purpose. But I reminded her that we had little leisure to stand talking, and left her to make her preparations for the journey, whilst I went below to see that my mule and her horse were saddled. I made bold to pay the reckoning, and when presently she spoke of it, with flaming cheeks, and would have pledged me a jewel, I bade her look upon it as a loan which anon she might repay me when I had brought her safely to her kinsman's court at Pesaro. Thus, at last, we left Cagli and took the road north, riding side by side and talking pleasantly the while, ever concerned the matter of flight and of her hopes of shelter at Pesaro, which, being nearest to her heart, found readiest expression. I went wrapped in my cloak once more, my head dress hidden neath my broad-brimmed hat, so that the few wayfarers we chance on need not marvel to see a lady in such friendly intercourse with fool. And so dull was I that day as not to marvel myself at such a state of things. The sun was declining, a red ball of fire, toward the mountains on our left, casting a blood-red glow upon the snow that everywhere encompassed us, as we cantered briskly on towards Fossombrone. In that hour I fell to pondering, and I even caught myself hoping that Messer Ramiro del Orca might not chance upon the discovery of how egregiously I had fooled him. He was dull-witted and slow at inference, and upon that I built the hope that he might fail to associate me with Madonna Paola's illusion of his pursuit. Thus the chance might yet be mine of returning to Rome, and the honorable employment Cesare Borgia had promised me, if only that were so to fall out, I might yet contrive to mend the wreckage of my life. I was returned, it seems, to the ways of early youth, when we build our hopes of future greatness upon untenable foundations. Great hopes and great ambitions rose within my breast that January evening, fired by the gentle child that rode beside me. Fate had sent me to her aid that day, and I seemed to have acquired, by virtue of that circumstance, a certain right in her. Had fate no other favors for me in her lap, I bethought me of the very house of Sforza, to which I had been so shamefully attached, and of its humble source in that peasant, Giacomuso Attendolo, surnamed Sforza for his abnormal strength of body, who rose to great and princely heights. Assuredly I had the advantage of such an one, and were the chance but given me, I went no further. Down in my heart, I laughed to scorn my own wild musings. Cesare Borgia would come to know. He must, whether Ramiro told him, or whether he inferred it for himself in the account Ramiro must give him of our meeting, how I had thwarted him in one thing, whilst I had served him in another. Fate was against me. I had fallen too low to ever rise again, and no dreams indulged in a sunset hour, and inspired, perhaps, by a child who was beautiful as when a saint of God, would ever come to be realized by poor Boccadoro. Night was falling as we clattered through the slippery streets of Fossombrone. Chapter 5. Madonna's Ingratitude. We stayed in Fossombrone little more than a half hour, and having made a hasty supper, we resumed our way, giving out that we wished to reach Fano ere we slept. And so by the first hour of night, Fossombrone was a league or so behind us, and we were advancing briskly towards the sea. Overhead a moon rode at the full in a clear sky, and its light was reflected by the snow, so that we were not discomforted by any darkness. We fell, presently, into a gentler pace, for after all, there could be no advantage in reaching Pesaro before morning. And as we rode, we talked, and I made bold to ask her the cause of her flight from Rome. She told me then that she was Madonna Paula Sforza di Sant'Afier, and that Pope Alexander, in his nepotism and his desire to make rich and powerful alliances for his family, had settled upon her as the wife for his nephew, Ignacio Borgia. He had been emboldened to this step by the fact that her only protector was her brother, Filippo di Sant'Afier, whom they had sought to coerce. It was her brother who, seeing himself in a dangerous and unenviable position, had secretly suggested flight to her, urging her to repair to her kinsman Giovanni Sforza at Pesaro. Her flight, however, must have been speedily discovered, and the Borgias, who saw in that act defiance of their supreme authority, had ordered her pursuit. But for me, she concluded, that pursuits must have resulted in her capture, and once they had her back in Rome, willing or unwilling, they would have driven her into the alliance by means which they sought to bring her fortune into their own house. This drew her into fresh protestations of the undying gratitude she entertained towards me, protestations which I would have stemmed, but that she persisted in them. "It is a good and noble thing that you have done," said she, "and I think that heaven must have directed you to my aid, for it is scarce likely that in all Italy I should have found another man who would have done so much." "Why, what, after all, is this much that I have done?" I cried. "It is no less than my manhood bade me do, no less than any other would have done seeing you so beset." "Nay, that is more than I can ever think," she answered. "Who, for the sake of an unknown, would have suffered such inconveniences as have you? Who would have returned as you have returned to advise me of the defection of my grooms? Who, when other escort failed, would have gone the length of journeying all this way to render a service that is beyond repayment? And, above all, who for the sake of an unknown maid would have submitted to this travesty of yours?" "Travesty," quoth I. so struck by that as to interrupt her at last. What travesty, Madonna? Why? This garb of motley that you donned the better to fool my pursuers, and that you still wear in my poor service. I turned in the saddle to stare at her, and in the moonlight, I clearly saw her eyes meet mine. So, that was the reason of her kindness and of the easy familiarity of her speech with me. She deemed me some knight-errant who caracoled to Italy in quest of imperiled maidens needing aid. Of a certainty, she had gathered her knowledge of the world from the works of Messer Boccadoro, or perhaps from the Amadis of Gaul of Messer Bernardo Tasso. And no doubt, she thought that suits of motley grew on bushes by the roadside, whence those who had a fancy for disguise might cull them. Well, it were better she should know the truth at once, and choose such a demeanor as she considered fitting towards a fool. I had no stomach for the courtesies that were meant for such a man as I was not. Madonna, you are in error, I informed her, speaking slowly. This garb is no travesty. It is my usual raiment. There was a pause, and I saw the slackening of her reins. No doubt, had we been afoot, she would have halted, the better to confront me. How? She asked, and a new note, imperious and chill, was sounding already in her voice. You would not have me understand that you are by trade a fool? Allowing that I am not a fool by birth, under what other circumstances, think you, I should be likely to wear the garments of a fool? But this morning, she protested after a brief pause, when first I met you, you were not so arrayed. I was arrayed even as I am now, in a cloak and hat and boots that hid my motley from such undiscerning eyes as were yours and your groom's, all taken up with your own fears as you then were. There was in the tale of that a sting, as I meant there should be, for the sudden haughtiness of her tone was cutting into me. Was I less worthy of thanks because I was a fool? Had I on that account done less to serve and save her? Or was it that the action which, in a spurred and armored knight, had been accounted noble was deemed unworthy of thanks in a crested, motley jester? It seemed, indeed, that some such reasoning she followed, for after that we spoke no more until we were approaching Fano. Many times before it I felt the shame of my ignoble trade, but never so acutely as at that moment. It had seared my soul when Giovanni Sforza had told my story to his court, ere he had driven me from Pesaro with threats of hanging, and it had burned even deeper when later, Madonna Lucrezia, upon entrusting me with her letter to her brother, had upbraided me with the supineness that so long had held me in that vile bondage. But deepest of all went now the burning iron of that disgrace. For my companion's silence seemed to argue that had she known my quality, she would scorn the aid of which she had availed herself to such good purpose. If any doubt of this had mercifully remained me, her next words would have served to have resolved it. It was when the lights of Fano gleamed ahead. We were coming to a crossroads, and I urged the turning to the left. But Fano is in front, she remonstrated coldly. This way we can avoid the town and gain the Pesaro road beyond it. Answered I, my tone as cool as hers. Yet may it not be that at Fano I might find an escort? I could have cried out at her cruelty, for in her words I could but read my dismissal from her service. There had been no more talk of an escort other than that which I afforded, and with which at first she had been well content. I sat my mule in silence for a moment. She had been very justly served had I been the vassal that she deemed me, and had I borne myself in that character, without consideration of her sex, her station, or her years. She had been very justly served had I wheeled about and left her there to make her way to Fano, and thence to Pesaro as best she might. She was without money, as I knew, and she would have found in Fano such a reception as would have brought the bitter tears of late repentance to her pretty eyes. But I was soft-hearted, and so I reasoned with her, yet in a manner that was to leave her no doubt of the true nature of her situation, and the need to use me with little courtesy for the sake of what I might yet do, if she lacked the grace to treat me with gratitude for the sake of that which I had done already. Madonna, said I, it were wiser to choose the by-road and forego the escort, since we had dispensed with it so far. There are many reasons why a lady should not seek to enter Fano at this hour of night. I know of none, she interrupted me. That may well be. Nevertheless, they exist. This night riding in so lonely a fashion is little to my taste, she told me sullenly. I am for Fano. She had the mercy to spare me the actual words, yet her tone told me as plainly as if she had uttered them that I could go with her or not, as I should choose. In silence, Very sore heart, I turned my mule's head once more towards the lights of the town. Since you are resolved, so be it, was all my answer, and we proceeded. No word did we exchange until we had entered the main street, when she curtly asked me which was the best inn. The Golden Fish, said I as curtly, and to the Golden Fish we went. Arrived there, Madonna Paola took affairs into her own hands. She dismounted, leaving the reins with a groom, and entering the common room, she proclaimed her needs to those that occupied it by loudly calling upon the landlord to find her an escort of 3 or 4 knaves to accompany her at once to Pesaro, where they should be well rewarded by the Lord Giovanni, her cousin. I had followed her in, and I ground my teeth at such an egregious piece of folly. Her hood was thrown back, displaying the lens of fine linen on her sable hair, and over this a net of purest gold all set with jewels. Her kimora, too, was open, and in her girdle there were gems for all to see. There were but a half-dozen men in the room. 2 of these had a venerable air. They may have been traders journeying to Milan, whilst a third, who sat apart, was a slender, effeminate-looking youth. The remaining 3 were fellows of rough aspect, and when one of them, a black-browed ruffian, raised his eyes and fastened them upon the riches that Madonna Paola with such indifference displayed, I knew what was to follow. He rose upon the instant, and stepping forward, he made her a low bow. "Illustrious lady," said he, "if these 2 friends of mine and I find favor with you, here is an escort ready found. We are stout fellows and very faithful to their cutthroat trade." I made no doubt he meant. His fellows now rose also, and she looked them over, giving herself the airs of having spent her virgin life in judging men by their appearance. It was in vain I tugged her cloak. In vain I murmured the word "wait" under cover of my hand. She there, and then engaged them, and bade them make ready to set out at once. One more attempt I made to induce her to alter her resolve. "Madonna," said I, "it is an unwise thing to go a-journeying by night with 3 unknown men and of such villainous appearance. To me they seem no better than bandits." We were standing apart from the others, and she was sipping a cup of spice wine that the host had mulled for her. She looked at me with a tolerant smile. "They are poor men," said she. "Would you have them robed in velvet?" "My quarrel is with their looks, Madonna, not their garments," I answered patiently. She laughed lightly, carelessly, even, I thought, a trifle scornfully. "You are very fanciful," said she, then added, "but if so be that you are afraid to trust yourself in their company, why then, sir, I need bring you no farther out of the road that you were following when first we met." Did the child think that some jealousy actuated me, and prompted me to inspire her with mistrust of my supplanters? She angered me. Yet now, more than ever was I resolved to journey with her, leave her at the mercy of those ruffians, whom in her ignorance she was mad enough to trust. I could not even had she whipped me. She was so young, so frail and slight, that none but a craven could have found in his heart to have deserted her just then. "If it please you, Madonna," I answered smoothly, "I will make bold to travel on with you." It may be that my even accent stung her. Perhaps she read in them some measure of reproof of the ingratitude that lay in her altered bearing towards me. Her eyes met mine across the table, and seemed to harden as she looked. Her answer came in a vastly altered tone. "Why, if you are bent that way, I shall be glad to have you avail yourself of my escort, Boccadoro." I had suffered the scorn now of her speech, now of her silence, for some hours, but never was I so near to turning on her as at that moment, never so near to consigning her to the fate to which her headstrong folly was compelling her. That she should take that tone with me, the violence of the sudden choler I suppressed, turned me pale under her steady glance, so that, seeing it, her own cheeks flamed crimson and her eyes fell, as if in token that she realized the meanness of her bearing. To some natures there can be nothing more odious than such a realization, and of those, I think, was she, for she stamped her foot in a sudden pet, and curtly asked the host why there was such delay with the horses. "They are at the door, Madonna," he protested, bowing as he spoke, "and your escort is already waiting in the saddle." She turned and strode abruptly toward the threshold. Over her shoulder she called to me, "If you come with us, Boccadoro, you had best be brisk." "I follow, Madonna," said I with a grim relish, "so soon as I paid the reckoning." She halted and half turned, and I thought I saw a slight droop at the corners of her mouth. "You are keeping count what I owe you," she muttered. "Ay, Madonna, I answered more grimly still, I am keeping count. And I thought that my wits were vastly at fault if that account were not to be greatly swelled ere Pesaro was reached. Haply indeed, my own life might go to swell it. I almost took a relish in that thought. Perhaps then, when I was stiff and cold, done to death in her service, this handsome, ungrateful child would come to see how much discomfort I had suffered for her sake. My thoughts still ran in that channel as we rode out of Pesaro, for I misliked the way in which those knaves disposed themselves about us. In front went Madonna Paola, and immediately behind her, so that their horses' heads were on a level with her saddle-bow, one on each side, went two of those ruffians. The third, whom I had heard them call Stefano, and who was the one who had made her the offer of their services, ambled at my side, a few paces in the rear, and sought to draw me into conversation, happily by way of throwing me off my guard. Mistrust is a fine thing at times. Forewarned is forearmed, says the proverb, and of all forewarnings there is none we are more likely to heed than our own mistrust. For whereas we may leave unheeded the warnings of a friend, we seldom leave unheeded the warnings of our spirit. And so, while my amiable and garrulous Ser Stefano engaged me in pleasant conversation, addressing me ever as Messer the Fool, since he knew me not by name, I wrapped my cloak about me, and under cover of it kept my fingers on the hilt of my stout Pistoja dagger, ready to draw and use it at the first sign of mischief. For that sign I was all eyes, and had I been Argus himself, I could have kept no better watch. Meanwhile, I plied my tongue and maintained as merry a conversation with Ser Stefano as you could wish to hear, for he seemed a ready-witted knave of a most humorous turn of fancy. God rest his rascally soul. And so it came to pass that I did by him the very thing he sought to do by me. I lulled him into a careless confidence. At last the sign I had been waiting for was given. I saw it as plainly as if it had been meant for me. I believe I saw it before the man for whom it was intended, and but for my fears concerning Madonna Paola, I could have laughed outright at their clumsy assurance. The man who rode on Madonna's right turned in his saddle, and put up his hand as if to beckon Stefano. I was regaling him with one of the choicest of Messer Sacchetti's paradoxes, gurgling myself at the humor of the thing I told. I paid no heed to the sign. I continued to expound my quip, as though we had a night before us in which to make its elusive humor clear. But out of the tail of my eye I watched my good friend Stefano, and I saw his right hand steal round the region of his back, where I knew his dagger to be slung. Yet was I patient. There should be no blundering through an excessive precipitancy. I talked on until I saw that my suspicions were amply realized. I caught the cold gleam of steel in the hand that he brought back as stealthily as he had carried it to his poniard. Sant idio! What a coward he was for all his bulk, to go so slyly about the business of stabbing a poor, helpless, defenseless fool. But Sacchetti makes his point clear. I babbled on most blandly, almost as clear, as comprehensive, and as penetrating as should be to you the point of this. And with a swift movement I swung half round in my saddle, and sank my dagger to the hilt in his side, even as he was in the act of raising his. He made no sound beyond the faintest gurgle, the first vowel of a suddenly choked word of wonder and surprise. He rocked a second in his saddle, then crashed over and lay with arms flung wide, like a huge black crucifix, upon the white ground. At the same moment, a piercing scream broke from Madonna Paola. I tremble still to think what might have been her fate, had not those ruffians who had laid hands on her fallen into the sorry error of holding their single adversary too lightly. They heard the thud of the gallant Stefano's fall, and they never doubted that mine was the body that had gone down. They heard the rapid hoofbeats of my approach, yet they never turned their heads to ascertain whether they might not be mistaken in their firm conviction that it was Messer Stefano who was joining them. I kissed my blade for luck, and drove it straight and full into the back of the fellow on Madonna Paola's right. He cried out, essayed to turn his saddle that he might deal with this unlooked-for assailant. Then, overcome, he lurched forward onto the withers of his horse, and thence rolled over, and was dragged away at the gallop, his foot caught in a stirrup, by the suddenly startled brute he rode. So far things had gone with an amazing and delightful ease. If only the last of them had had the amiability to be intimidated by my prowess and to have taken to his heels, I might have issued from that contest with the unscathed glory of a very Mars. But from his throat there came, in answer to his comrade's cry, a roar of rage. He fell back from Madonna, and wheeled his horse to come at me, drawing his sword as he advanced. "Ride on, Madonna!" I shouted, I will rejoin you presently." The fellow laughed, a mighty ugly and discomposing laugh, which may or may not have shaken her faith in my promise to rejoin her. It certainly went near to shaking mine. However, she displayed a presence of mind full worthy of the haughtiness and ingratitude of which she had showed herself capable. She urged her mule forward, and so left him a clear road to attack me. I made a mistake then that went mighty near to costing me my life. I paused to twist my cloak about my left arm, intending to use it as a buckler. Had I but risked the arm itself, all unprotected, in that task, it may well be that it served me better. As it was, my preparations were far from complete when already he was upon me, with the result that the waving slack of my cloak was in my way to hamper and retard the movements of my arm. His sword leapt at me, a murderous blue-white flash of moonlit steel. I put my half-swaddled arm to divert the thrust, holding my dagger ready in my right, and gripping my mule with all the strength of my 2 knees. I caught the blade, it is true, and turned aside the stroke intended for my heart. But the slack of the cloak clung to the neck of my mule, so that I could not carry my arm far enough to send his point clear of my body. It took me in the shoulder, stinging me, first icy cold and burning hot, as it went tearing its way through. For just a second was I daunted, more at knowing myself touched than by the actual pain. Then I flung my whole body forward to reach him at the close quarters to which he had come, and I buried my dagger in his breast, high up at the base of his dirty throat. The force of blow carried me forward, even as it bore him backward. And so, with the sword blade at my shoulder and my dagger where I had planted it, we hurtled over together and lay a second amidst what seemed a forest of equine legs. Then something smote me across the head, and I was knocked senseless. Conceive me, if you can, a sorrier or more useless thing, a senseless fool. Chapter 6. Fool's Luck. My return to consciousness seemed to afford me such sensations as a diver may experience as he rises up and up through the depth of water he has plumbed, or as a disembodied soul may know in its gentle ascent towards heaven. Indeed, the latter parallel may be more apartment. For through the mist that suffused my senses there penetrated from overhead a voice that seemed to invoke every saint in the calendar on the behalf of some poor mortal. A very litany of intercession was it, not quite, it would appear, devoid of self-seeking. Sainted Virgin, restore him. Good St. Paul, who wert done to death with a sword, let him not perish, else am I lost indeed, came the voice. I took a deep breath and opened my eyes, whereat the voice cried out gladly that its intercessions had been heard, and I knew that it was on my behalf that the saints of heaven had been disturbed in their beatific peace. My head was pillowed in a woman's lap, and it took me a moment or two to realize that that lap was Madonna Paula's, as was hers the voice that had reached my awakening senses, the voice that now welcomed me back to life in terms that were very different from the last that I could remember her having used towards me. "Thank God, Messer Boccadoro," she exclaimed, as she bent over me. Her face was black with shadow, but in her voice I caught a hint of tears, and I wondered whether they were shed on my behalf or on her own. "I do," I answered fervently. "Have you any notion of what hour it is?" "None," she sighed. "You have been so long unconscious that I was losing hope of ever hearing your voice again." I became aware of a dull ache on the right side of my head. I put up my hand and withdrew it moist. She saw the action. "One of the horses must have struck you with his hoof after you fell," she explained. "But I was more concerned for your other wound." I withdrew the sword with my own hands. That other wound she spoke of was now making itself felt as well. It was a gnawing, stinging pain in the region of my left shoulder, which seemed to turn me numb to the waist on that side of my body, and render powerless my arm. I questioned her touching my 3 adversaries, and she silently pointed to 3 black masses that lay some little distance from us in the snow. "Not all dead?" I cried. "I do not know," she answered with a sob. "I have not dared go near them. They frightened me. Mother of Heaven, what a night of horror it has been." "Oh!" "That I had taken your advice? Messer Boccacloro!" she exclaimed in a passion of self-reproach. I laughed, seeking to soften her distress. "To me it seems that whether you would or not, you have been compelled to take it. After all, those fellows lie there harmless enough, and I am still, as I urged that I should be, your only escort." "A nobler protector never woman had," she assured me, and I felt a hot pearl of moisture fail upon my brow. You were wise, at least, to journey with a fool, I answered her. For fools are proverbially lucky folk, and tonight has proven me of all fools the luckiest. But, Madonna, I suggested in a different tone, should we not be better advised to attempt to resume this interesting journey of ours? We did not seem to lack horses. A couple of nags were standing by the roadside, together with our mules, and I was afterwards to learn that she herself, had tethered them. It must be at some 3 leagues of Pesaro, I added, and if we journey slowly, as I fear me that we must, we should arrive there soon after daybreak. Do you think that you can stand? She asked, a hopeful ring in her voice. I might essay it, answered I, and I would have done so there and then, but that she detained me. First let me see to this hurt in your head, said she. I have been bathing it with snow while you were unconscious. She gathered a fresh handful as she spoke, and very tenderly she wiped away the blood. Then from her own head she took the fine linen lanza that she wore and made a bandage sweet with a faint fragrance of marshmallow, and bound it about my battered skull. When that was done, she turned her attention to my shoulder. This was a more difficult matter, and all that we could do was to attempt to stanch the blood, which already had drenched my double on that side. To this end she passed a long scarf under my arm, and wound it several times about my shoulder. At last her gentle ministrations ended. I sought to rise. A dizziness assailed me, scarce was I on my feet, and it is odds I had fallen back, but that she caught and steadied me. Mother in heaven, you are too weak to ride, she exclaimed. You must not attempt it. Nay, but I will, I answered, with more stoutness of tone than I felt of body, and notwithstanding that my knees were loosening under my weight. It is a faintness that will pass. If ever man willed himself to conquer weakness, that did I then, and with some measure of success, or else it was that my faintness passed of itself. I drew away from her support and straightening myself, I crossed to where the animals were tethered, staggering at first, but presently with surer foot. She followed me, watching my steps with as much apprehension as a mother may feel when her firstborn makes his earliest attempt at walking, and as ready to spring to my aid did I show signs of stumbling. But I kept up, and presently my senses seemed to clear, and I stepped out more surely. A while we stood discussing which of the animals we should take. It was my suggestion that we should ride the horses, but she wisely contended that the mules would prove the more convenient if the slower. I agreed with her, and then, ere we set out, I went to see to my late opponents. One of them, Ser Stefano, was cold and stiff. The other 2 still lived, and from the nature of their wounds seemed likely to survive, if only they were not frozen to death before some good Samaritan came upon them. I knelt a moment to offer up a prayer for the repose of the soul of him that was dead, and I bound up the wounds of the living as best I could, to save them greater loss of blood. Indeed, had it lain in my power, I would have done more for them. But in what case was I to render further aid? After all, they had brought their fate upon themselves, and I doubt not they were paying a score that they had heaped up heavily in the past. I went back to the mules, and, despite my remonstrances, Madonna Paula insisted upon aiding me to mount, urging me to have a care of my wound, and to make no violent movement that should set it bleeding again. Then she mounted too, nimble as any boy that ever robbed an orchard, and we set out once more. And now it was a very contrite and humbled lady that rode with me, and one that was at no pains to dissemble her contrition, but rather could speak of nothing else. It moved me strangely to have her suing pardon from me, as though I had been her equal instead of the sometime jester of the court of Pesaro, dismissed for an excessive pertness towards one with whom his master curried favor. And presently, as was perhaps but natural after all that she had witnessed, she fell to questioning me as to how it came to pass that one of such wit, resource, and courage should follow the mean calling to which I had owned. In answer, I told her without reservation the full story of my shame. It was a thing that I had ever most zealously kept hidden, as already I have shown. To be a fool was evil enough in all truth, but to let men know that under my motley was buried the identity of a man patrician-born was something infinitely worse. For, however vile the trade of a fool may be, it is not half so vile for a low-born clod who is too indolent or too sickly to do honest work, as for one who has accepted it out of half cowardice and persevered in it through very sloth. Yet on that night, and after all that had chanced, No matter how my cheeks might burn the gloom as I rode beside her, I was glad for once to tell that ignominious story, glad that she should know what weight of circumstance had driven me to wear my hideous livery. But since my story dealt oddly with that Lord of Pesaro, the kinsman whose shelter she was now upon her way to seek, I must first assure myself that the candor to which I was disposed would not offend. "Does it happen, Madonna," I inquired, "that you are well acquainted with the Lord of Pesaro?" "Nay, I have never seen him," answered she. "When he was at Rome, a year ago in the service of the Pope, I was at my studies in the convent. His father was my father's cousin, so that my kinship is none so near. Why do you ask?" "Because my story deals with him, Madonna, and it is no pretty tale. Not such a narrative as I should choose wherewith to entertain you. Still, since you have asked for it, you shall hear it. It was in the year that Giovanni Sforza, Lord of Pesaro, celebrated his nuptials with the Lady Lucrezia Borgia. 3 years ago, therefore, that one morning there rode into the courtyard of his castle of Pasaso a tall and lean young man on a tall and lean old horse. He was garbed and harnessed after a fashion that proclaimed him half knight, half peasant, and caused the castle lackeys to eye him with amusement and greet him with derision. Lackeys are great arbiters of fashion. In a loud, imperious voice this cockerel called for Giovanni, Lord of Pesaro, whereupon, resenting the insolence of his manner, the men-at-arms would have driven him out without more ado. But it chanced that from one of the windows of his stronghold the tyrant espied his odd visitor. He was in a mood that craved amusement, and marveling what madman might be this, he made his way below and bade him stand back and let me speak, for I, Madonna, was that lean young man. "Are you," quoth I, "the Lord of Pesaro?" He answered me courteously that he was, whereupon I did my errand to him. I flung my gauntlet of buffalo hide at his feet in gage of battle. "Your father," said I, "Costanzo of Pesaro, was a foul brigand, who robbed my father of his castle and lands by Ancamont, leaving him to a needy and poverty-stricken old age. I am here to avenge upon your father's son my father's wrongs. I am here to redeem my castle and my lands. If so be that you are a true knight, you will take up the challenge that I fling you, and you will do battle with me, on horse or foot, and with whatsoever arms you shall decree, God defending him that is justice on his side." "Knowing the world as I know it now, Madonna," I interpolated, "I realize the folly of that act of mine. But in those days my views belonged to a long-departed age of chivalry, of which I had learnt from such books as came my way at Biancamont, and which I believe was the life of today in the world of men. It was a thing which some tyrants would have had me broken on the wheel. But Giovanni Sforza never so much as manifested anger. There was a complacent smile on his white face, and his fingers toyed carelessly with his beard. I waited patiently, very haughty of mien and very fierce at heart, and when the amusement began to fade from his eyes, I begged that he would deliver me his answer. "My answer," quoth he, "is that you get you back to the place from whence you came, and render thanks to God on your knees every morning of the life I am sparing you that Giovanni Sforza is more entertained and affronted by your frenzy." At his words, I went crimson from chin to brow. "Do you disdain me?" I questioned, choking with rage. He turned with a shrug and a laugh, and bade one of his men to give this cavalier his glove, and conduct him from the castle. Several that stood at hand made shift to obey him, whereat I fell into such a blind, unreasoning fury that incontinently I drew my sword, and laid about me. They were many, I was but one, and they were not long in overpowering me and dragging me from my horse. They bound me fast, and Giovanni bade them let me have a priest, then get me hanged without delay. Had he done that, the world being as it is, perhaps none could blame him. But he elected to spare my life, yet on such terms as I could never have accepted had it not been for the consideration of my poor widowed mother, whom I had left in the hills of Biancamont, whilst I went forth to seek my fortune. Such was the tale I had told her. I was her sole support, her only hope in life, and my death must have been her own, if not from grief, why, then from very want. The thought of that poor old woman crushed my spirit as I sat in durance waiting for my end, and when the priest came, whom they had sent to shrive me, he found me weeping, which he took to argue a contrite heart. He bore the tale of it to Giovanni, and the Lord of Pesaro came to visit me in consequence, and found me sorely changed from my furious mood of some hours earlier. I was a very coward, I own, but it was for my mother's sake. If I feared death, it was because I bethought me of what it must mean to her. At sight of Giovanni, I cast myself at his feet, and with tears in my eyes and in heart-rending tones, bespeaking a humility as great as had been my erstwhile arrogance, I begged my life of him. I told him the truth, that for myself I was not afraid to die, but that I had a mother in the hills who was dependent on me, and who must starve if I were thus cut off. He watched me with his moody eyes, a saturnine smile about his lips. Then of a sudden he shook with a silent mirth, whose evil, malicious depth I was far indeed from suspecting. He asked me would I take solemn oath that if he spared my life, I would never again raise my hand against him. That oath I took with a greediness born of my fear of the death that was impending. You have been wise, said he, and you shall have your life on one condition, that you devote it to my service. Even that will I do, I answered readily. He turned to an attendant and ordered him to go fetch a suit of motley. No word passed between us until that man returned with those garish garments. Then Giovanni smiled on me in his mocking, infernal way. Not that, I cried, guessing his purpose. Aye, that, he answered me, that or the hangman's noose. A man who could devise so monstrous a jest as was your challenge to the tyrant of Pesaro should be a merry fellow if he would. I need such a one. There are 2 fools at my court, but they are mere tumblers, deformed vermin that excite as much disgust as mirth. I need a sprightlier man, a man of some learning and more drollery. Such a man, in short, as you would seem to be. I recoiled in horror and disgust. Was this his clemency, despairing of my life that he might submit it to an eternal shame? For a moment my mother was forgotten. I thought only of myself, and I grew resolved to hang. When you spoke of service, said I thought of service of an honorable sort. The service that I offer you is honorable, he said with cold amusement. Indeed, remembering that your life was forfeit, you should account yourself most fortunate. You shall be well housed and well fed. You shall wear silk and lie in fine linen, on condition that you are merry. If you prove dull our castellan shall have you whipped. For such a one as you could not be dull save out of sullenness, of which we shall seek to cure you if you show signs of it. I will not do it, I cried, it were too base. My friend, he answered me, the choice is yours. You shall have an hour in which to resolve what you will do. When they open this door for you at sunset, come forth clad as you are, and you shall hang. If you prefer to live, then don me that robe and cap of motley, and on condition that you are merry, life is yours. I paused a moment. Our horses were moving slowly, for the tale engrossed us both, me in the telling, her in the hearing. Presently, I need not harass you with the reflections that were mine during that hour. Madonna, rather let me ask you, how should a man so placed make choice to be full worthy of the office proffered him? There was a moment's silence while she pondered. Why, she answered me at last, a fool I take it with chosen death, the wise man life, since it must hold a hope of better days. And since it asked a man of wit to play the fool to such a tune as the Lord Giovanni piped, that wise young man chose life and folly. But was that choice indeed so wise? The story ends not there. That young man whose early life had been one of hardships found himself, indeed, well housed and fed as the Lord Giovanni had promised him. And so, he fell into a slothful spirit, and was content to play the fool for bed and board. There were times when conscience knocked loudly at my heart, and I was tortured with shame to see myself in the garb of fools, the sport of all, from prince to scullion. But in the 3 years that I had dwelt at Pesaro, my identity had been forgotten by the few who had ever been aware of it. Moreover, a court is a place of changes, and in 3 years there had been such comings and goings at the court of Giovanni Sforza, that not more than 1 or 2 remained of those that had inhabited it when first I entered on my existence there. Thus had my position grown steadily more bearable. I was just a jester and no more, and so, in a measure, though I blush to say it, I grew content. I gathered consolation from the fact that there were not any who now remembered the story of my coming to Pesaro, or who knew of the cowardliness I had been guilty of when I consented to mask myself in the motley and assume the name of Boccadoro. I counted on the Lord Giovanni's generosity to let things continue thus, and meanwhile, I provided for my mother out of veils that were earned me by my shame. But there came a day when Giovanni, in evil wantonness of spirit, chose to make merry at the fool's expense. To be held up to scorn and ridicule is a part of the trade of such as I, and had it been just Boccadoro whom Giovanni had exposed to the derision of his court, haply I had been his jester still. But such sport as that would have satisfied but ill the deep-seated malice of his soul. The man whom his cruel mockery crucified for their entertainment was Lazzaro Biancamont, whom he revealed to them, relating in his own fashion the tale I have told you. At that I rebelled, and I said such things to him in that hour, before all his court, as a man may not say to a prince and live. Passion surged up in him, and he ordered his castellan to flog me to the bone. In short, to slay me with a whip. From that punishment I was saved by the intercessions of Madonna Lucrezia. But I was driven out of Pesaro that very night, and so it happens that I am a wanderer now. At that I left it. I had no mind to tell her what motives had impelled Lucrezia Borgia to rescue me, nor on what errand I had gone to Rome, and was from Rome returning. She had heard me in silence, and now that I had done, she heaved a sigh, for which gentle expression of pity out of my heart I thanked her. We were silent thereafter for a little while. At length she turned her head to regard me in the light of the now declining moon. "Messer Biancamont," said she, and the sound of the old name, falling from her lips, thrilled me with joy unspeakable and seemed already to reinvest me in my old estate. "Messer Biancamont, you have done me in these 24 hours such service as never did knight of old for any lady. And you did it, too, out of the most disinterested and noble of motives, proving thereby how truly knightly is that heart of yours, which for my sake has all but beat its last tonight. You must journey on to Pesaro with me despite this banishment, of which you have told me. I will be surety that no harm shall come to you. I could not do less, and I shall hope to do far more. Such influence as I may prove to have with my cousin of Pesaro shall be exerted all on your behalf, my friend. And if in the nature of Giovanni Sforza there be a tide of the gratitude with which you have inspired me, you shall at least have justice, and Biancamont shall be yours again." I was silent for a spell. So touched was I by the kindness she manifested me. So touched, indeed, and so unused to it that I forgot how amply I had earned it, and how rudely she had used me ere that was done. Alas! I sighed. God knows I am no longer fit to sit in the house of the Biancamont. I am come to lo Madonna. That Lazzaro after whom you are named, she answered, had come yet lower, but he lived again and resumed his former station. Take your courage from that. He lived not at the mercy of Giovanni of Pesaro, said I. There was a fresh pause at that. Then at least, she urged me, you'll come to Pesaro with me? Why, yes, said I. I could not let you go alone. And in my heart I felt a pang of shame, and called myself a cur for making use of her, as I was doing to reach the court of Giovanni Sforza. You need fear no consequences, she promised me. I can be surety for that at least. In the east a brighter, yellower light than the moons began to show. It was the dawn, from which I gathered that it must be approaching the 13th hour. Pesaro could not be more than a couple of leagues farther, and presently, when we had gained the summit of the slight hill we were ascending, we beheld in the distance a blurred mass looming on the edge of the glittering sea. A silver ribbon that uncoiled itself from the western hills disappeared behind it. That silvery streak was the river Foglia, the heap of buildings against the landscape's virgin white, the town of Pesaro. Madonna pointed to it with a sudden cry of gladness. See, Messer Biancamont, how near we are. Courage, my friend, a little farther, and yonder we have rest and comfort for you. She had need, in truth, to cry me courage, for I was weakening fast once more. It may have been much that I had talked, or the infernal jolting of my mule, but I was losing blood again, and as we were on the point of riding forward, my senses swam, so that I cried out, and but for her prompt assistance, I might have rolled headlong from my saddle. As it was, she caught me about the waist, as any mother might have done her son. "What ails you?" she inquired, her newly aroused anxiety contrasting sharply with her joyous cry of a moment earlier. "Are you faint, my friend?" It needed no confession on my part. My condition was all too plain, as I leaned against her frail body for support. "It is my wound," I gasped, then I set my teeth in anguish. So near the haven, and to fail now. It could not be. It must not be. I summoned all my resolution, all my fortitude, but in vain. Nature demanded payment for the abuses she had suffered. If we proceed thus, she ventured fearfully, you leaning against me and going at a slow pace, no faster than a walk, think you can bear it? Try, good Messer Biancamont. I will try, Madonna, I replied. Perhaps thus, and if I am silent, we may yet reach Pesaro together. If not, if my strength gives out, the town is yonder, and the day is coming. You will find your way without me. I will not leave you, sir, she vowed, and it was good to hear her. Indeed, I hope you may not know the need, I answered wearily. And thus we started on once more. San Idio, what agonies I suffered ere the sun rose up out of the sea to flood us with his winter glory. What agonies were mine during those 2 hours or so of that last stage of our eventful journey. I must bear up until we are at the gates of Pesaro, I kept murmuring to myself, and, as if my spirit were inclined to become the servant of my will and hold my battered flesh alive until we got that far, Pesaro's gates I had the joy of entering ere I was constrained to give way. Dimly I remember, for very dim were my perceptions growing, that as we crossed the bridge and passed beneath the archway of the Porta Romana, the officer turned out to see who came. At sight of me, he gaped a moment in astonishment. Boccadoro, he exclaimed at last, so soon returned? Like Perseus from the rescue of Andromeda, answered I in a feeble voice, saving that Perseus was less bloody than am I. Behold the Madonna Paula Sforza di Sant'Afier, the noble cousin of our high and mighty Lord. And then, as of my task being done, I were free to set my weary brain to rest. My senses grew confused. The officer's voice became a hum that gradually waxed fainter as I sank into what seemed the most luxurious and delicious sleep that ever mortal knew. 2 days later, when I was conscious once more, I learned what excitement those words of mine had sown, with what honors Madonna Paula was escorted to the castle, and how the citizens of Pesaro turned out upon hearing the news which ran like fire before us. And Madonna, it seems, had loudly proclaimed how gallantly I had served her, for as they bore me along in a cloak carried by 4 men-at-arms, the cry that was heard in the streets of Pesaro that morning was Boccadoro. They had loved me, had those good citizens of Pesaro, and the news of my departure had cast a gloom upon the town. To have their hero return in a manner so truly heroic provoked that brave display of their affection, and I deeply doubt if ever in the days of greatest loyalty the name of Sforza was as loudly cried in Pesaro as they tell me, was the name of Sforza's fool that day.